Good afternoon, happy Mother's Day, and welcome to Sunday Afternoons with our historian. Every Sunday at 2 o'clock, I'll be here or somewhere, and I'll talk D&H history with you. Hopefully people will have questions and we'll put them in the comment box, and we'll try and answer them. My excellent wife, Kelly, is my camera person again today. Does a great job. I'm so lucky to have her. We're all lucky to have her. I also want to wish happy birthday to my dad and my brother Dan, both of whom were born on May 10th. They always get eclipsed by Mother's Day, and today they're all on the same day. But let's get started. Today I thought I'd talk about new acquisitions this week and next week. And today I'm going to talk about things that were donated by you excellent people and discuss a little about how that helps us and what we learned. But because I'm going to be handling some of our collections, as per best practices, I'm first going to don my gloves. These are, you won't see this, these are nitrile, and that's considered the, that's what they tell us all to use these days, non-reactive plastic. Most of these are like the rubber gloves, the latex gloves you see. I found this pair in the hardware store. I find them much more comfortable, but I've still got the nice nitrile surface here. So best practices, people, we're a professional museum. Today, first, I'd like to shout out to Grace Moon. Grace and her family were High Falls regulars. Her late husband had the High Falls Pantry. Many High-Fallonians beloved the High Falls Pantry. To this day, people miss it. Grace has recently moved to the Midwest, but not before donating some great stuff to us. There's a wonderful desk in the Dupuque Canal House that came from her family, but I'm more interested today in these quilts. So here we've got a beautiful, you quilters out there probably know, I think actually this note that's with it. Now let's see if I can find that. Was that on this one? Yes. I had noticed here, you'd think I would have had this more prepared. Somewhere in here, one of these pieces of fabric actually have printing on them, and it was common in the era. I don't know how I managed to mess that up. It was common in the era that some things like flour were sold in sacks that people would then go and make quilts out of. And we had an evidence of that, and I just can't seem to find it. Isn't that wonderful?
Hold it up.
But it's just frustrating when you thought you had it all set up, right? Oh well, the best laid plans. But I'm going to read a little bit of the notes that we were given with them because I think this is really fascinating. This first quilt is the older, and this is a, what kind of pattern? She says here somewhere in here. It's a double Irish chain quilt, and there were a lot of Irish on the canal, weren't they? And this was made by Alice Coles Painter, who was 1878 to 1974, went to Vassar in 1999. She was a teacher serving in New York City. Well, no, now I'm getting confused. Let's skip. That's the later quilt. The first quilt, similar patterns, was started in 1860 by Anna Canteen Coles. Canteen, a local family, Coles, a local family. In fact, Coles Basin used to be on Coles land, just about a mile east of here, on private property now. And she was born in 1844 and lived till 1937. She worked on a canal boat, and the material for this quilt was largely purchased at one of the stores right next door. I've been doing a lot of work with these maps that we've gotten from Canada, these 1854 maps. And as I do my Where is Our Historian series, available on our YouTube channel, I'm really digging into exactly what was there. And one of the recent discoveries, there was a grocery store next to 3 and 4 locks in a row. And these had to have been, they're usually on the towpath side. These were grocery stores that actually were there for the canalers. But you can also buy fabric. And so we have this wonderful quilt with this wonderful story. And some more.
Can we see it?
Some more supporting details. Yeah, I still want to find that little piece of print. I thought that was so fascinating.
Yeah, but if you can open it up so we can see the pattern.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, hold it like that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Getting some details.
Let me know if you see some printing on there. It said number 1. But as I say, we know about quilting that it was such a common thing in the 19th century that manufacturers would actually put their products in bags, and women would then, when they were done with the product, would then make quilts out of the bag. And somewhere on this quilt, this we're pretty sure will make it into the social history room in our new museum because it's got such a powerful story. But the other great thing about getting these sorts of family quilts and canal era things is that you get the family history. And so we're constantly adding to our knowledge of who worked on the canal and what they were like. So these names go into a database that we're keeping and updating constantly, started by John and Patty Meltzer down in Florida, but used to live up here in Kerhonkson. Patty's still working on it, I'm still working on it. Every once in a while we get together and put them together. But the second quilt then, let's just see, was built by Alice Coles painter. And there's that Coles again. So very often in the early 20th century, 19th century history, that your mother's maiden name became your second name. So we've got a Anna Canteen Coles, so her mom was a Canteen. We've got an Alice Coles painter, her mom was a Coles, and that's the relationship to Grace Moon. Of course, Grace Moon, I don't know Grace's maiden name. Hey Grace, send that to us sometime, would you? I'll add it to the story here. And there's some great detail about just what the canal era was like. But the second one was done in the early 20th century by a teacher of sewing. So although it doesn't have a canal connection, except it's from a canal family, it's still a beautiful bit of material culture. And it also shows the way families, so it is indeed a very similar pattern, kept up tradition. That one woman in the family, a canaler, stitched this beautiful quilt on a canal boat with material bought canal side. And then the family, a later relation, goes and makes her own quilt. I'd be curious to know if any of you out there quilt today. I don't know that this is as prevalent as it used to be in the 19th century. But these are wonderful things that we're very blessed that Grace wanted to find them a home with us.
So Chester says hi, and Paul Orselli says looking forward to seeing the quilt in the new social history gallery in the new museum.
That's right. Paul Orselli, part of Paul Orselli Workshop, is one of the 2 exhibits designers we've hired. We love them. They're doing such a wonderful job. We're very excited about what we're going to be putting together with Paul's excellent help. Paul and Christina Forwerda. Christina actually lives here in High Falls. Well, full-time currently. Usually she's down in New York. And they're working feverishly. We've been contacting each other remotely and firming up the stories. But this indeed was one of the things we're giving you a little foreshadowing of our new museum. Set to open still in 2 years. I think we'll make it. And nice to see you both. Well, I don't see you, but nice to see you joining in. Both Chester and Paul. And here's another interesting item. Alice and Jack Schoonmaker. The Schoonmaker family, you locals would know Saunderskill Farm, that wonderful farm stand down in Accord. That's owned by the Schoonmakers. Jack is a farmer. Jack's a little older than I. He's an inspiration. He knows the old the stories that the farmers would tell. He's still a vital and vibrant man who goes out and works his farm to this day, even though he's in his, I don't want to say, in his 80s, I believe. And Jack tells me that his family has owned the same plot of land since 1672, I believe it is. Can you imagine? The same family. They live in a beautiful stone house. And furthermore, they tell the story that when the canal was passing through, the family ceded, probably got some money, ceded, but by cessation, 10 acres of land for the canal to build their canalway. But they made the request to the canal company that they make the canal go past their stone house. And then in that era, his great, however many greats it is, grandmother, operated a store in the basement of that wonderful stone house. And if you go and they invited me over, and I've gotten to walk the property somewhat. I'd like to go again this spring, though. I've got to get over there. Watch for that, and Where's Our Historian? It's just north of the Stony Kill Aqueduct, which is already shot and will be hung as one of our Where's Our Historian features sometime, I think, this month. But when you walk that ground, you can see that they did not have to take that detour around that house. So the family was nice enough to give up land. They accommodated the family. We know from letters of the chief engineer that when they were enlarging the canal, they would talk to the family and engage them and say which side. So they took the canal from 32 foot wide long and made it 40 to 50 foot wider. They were taking a decent swath of land, Russell Farnham Lord, in a letter to management, points out how they would actually hire the landowner and they would consult with them, and if possible, they'd widen on the side that the family would prefer. And I love, he says, perhaps you were in their favorite garden. I thought it humanizes the story, and I thought it was interesting to see the way the canal company tried to not make enemies, but tried to make friends by hiring them and by trying to include them in their plans whenever possible. But this sink would have come from the latest canal boats, which would have been the 91 foot by 14 and a half foot after 1850, from a boat that may have plied the canal as late as 1917. But this is the sink. I don't know much more. Where did the water come from? We don't know. Where did it go to? Well, it went down there, didn't it? But it's just wonderful to have an object like this.
Is it cast iron?
We have so few objects.
Is it cast iron?
Feels like it, yes. I would say that is cast iron.
Okay.
It's rusty, so we know it's steel or iron, and I'd have to imagine iron.
So Dr. Powell's watching, and Mariana is watching.
Great.
Apparently, Dr. Powell's has a lot of those cotton bags that cow feed used to come in.
There you go. Oh, cow feed. So for instance, I think just about any product that could be put in a bag, very often they'd have sometimes even patterns, as I understand it, and they were very common. I'm sorry, I can't. You do the best. I can't find that one little thing. I'll find it as soon as we get off here, won't I? The second I'm over. So we have some wonderful pictures of here's the interior, since we've got the mock-up of an interior of a canal boat behind me, an opportunity to take a look. This is the interior of the Iowa. Interesting story, the Iowa. Notice the piano. For years I always said, well, people lived on these boats from April till December. I said, wow, they even had a piano. Well, it was a much better story. The Iowa was a boat owned by Hunt and Donaldson, which was a hardware concern in Ellenville. But somebody in New York City, some rich swells, if you will, or certainly fairly well off, young people got together, rented the boat, got on the boat in New York City, went all the way up the Hudson River. They had chaperones for the ladies, but in fact there was apparently some shipboard romances that had to be nipped in the bud by the women who were there to chaperone. But this group of young people went all the way up the Hudson, traveled the canal, I believe to Honesdale and back, and then got off the boat and grabbed the Erie Railroad, which had gone through in 1850 right through there. The Erie, the first rail line from the New York City area all the way to Buffalo, I recently read. But then when that was all done, according to the notes in our files, the piano company came and took the piano. It was a rental. It made sense. Canalers didn't make enough money to own a piano. I had to change my story, but that's the thing about history. It's still a living thing. You make suppositions. I saw the picture, said, oh, these people even had their piano, and later learned the story that no, some better off people from New York City rented the piano for their trip. These stories, sometime I'll do a whole piece on the Iowa. We actually have in our archives the Journal of the Iowa, and I've always wanted to make a PowerPoint presentation, but maybe I'll figure out a way to adapt it here, I should say. But we get all sorts of stuff sent to us. I love when we get period photographs. Here's one that came to us recently. I can't remember offhand. You can handle that because it's in a sleeve. We've seen other shots. That bridge is well known. That's in Ellenville near the Napanock Correctional Facility. That's another one of those covered bridges. The back of this says Ellenville, New York, 1889. I believe this photo is one that I bought on an online auction. And I'm constantly finding things. We'll talk more about stuff that I've acquired in my 10 years with the organization in next week's acquisitions episode. Today I'm going to try and concentrate mainly on things that other people gave us, because I find it fascinating and really rewarding. Hey, Steve DeGroot, are you here today? Steve's in California, but Steve's family spent time on the canal, and Steve, about a year ago, sent us this wonderful photograph. Yep, Steve is in Los Angeles. How you all doing there, Steve? And there is a young man, that is his great-grandfather, or is it great-great? I think it's great-grandfather, Ralph Vandermark DeGroot. Vandermark's another local family. This is a typical latter part of the 19th century frame. As an antique dealer, I've run across these frames all the time. I love them myself. And the story is that young Ralph right here, as a young man, so he was born in 1887. So the time of the story, he was 10, maybe 11 years old. He was working as a hoagie or mule driver on his parents' boat. This was very common after the Civil War. Families were operating these boats. We have many pictures, Mom at the tiller, the children, and I'll show you another one of those pictures in a minute. But first, let me tell you Ralph's story. I mentioned the Erie Railroad. In the 1850s, the Erie workmen were feuding with all the canalers. They would deliberately set their explosions, their black powder explosions, so that the debris would rain down on the canalers. It was so dangerous, the canal company actually hired part-time, or I should say, they weren't retired, they would hire lawmen, both from New York City and from the surrounding areas, to police because they had so much trouble. There were fights between them. And of course, families in 1850 wouldn't let their children work on the canal, and there were a lot of children working the canal in the 19th century. But it was so dangerous. So this story relates to that. It's a family story. It's interesting because Steve told me the story one way, and then he sent me his grandfather's, or I guess it was his father's reminiscences. And there's one slight discrepancy that I think is sort of fun. So the story goes, a railway came by and possibly deliberately blew the horn right next to the team. Hard to say, maybe it was just a loud noise, but at any rate, the team of, they say horses, it was probably mules. In the 19th century, the term horses also referred often to mules. Mules were the preferred animal. Well, off goes the team, and young Ralph held onto the team for dear life and managed finally, Lord knows how far down the towpath, to actually pull that team. And then according to Steve, his father was so happy he gave him a nickel, which was a lot of money then. Well, later Steve sent me the reminiscence, and actually it was only 4 cents. Now, to you and I, same difference, right? 4 cents, 5 cents. But that penny was big back then, wasn't it? At any rate, young Ralph was very, very pleased to get that little sign of his that sign of appreciation from his father. But so we got stories and names. There's 3 different canalers mentioned in there. There was a Vandemark who operated 7 boats on the canal. So it's wonderful to get these histories. In fact, this PDF will be up that I've made of both Steve and his grandfather telling these tales. Will be part of our new website. We're going to have an archive section where we'll have articles written by myself, by Dr. Powell, by other canalers and canal historians. But also these little family histories will find their way there, as well as copies of a lot of these great pictures. This website should be live. We have a current website, but we'll be switching by the end of the month. It's canalmuseum.org. Please come by and visit us. We'd love to have you. But when I saw this picture, I noticed another thing. Take a close look. What you're seeing in the background right there is John Roebling's Lackawaxen Aqueduct. Between 1847 and 1850, John Augustus Roebling, German immigrant who invents wire rope, they say. Well, he didn't really invent it. He just perfected it. He figured out how to make it. And then he sold it to the D&H Canal Company for their gravity railroads. I believe gravity railroads were the first users of this wire rope. But this is his Lackawaxen suspension aqueduct. And this picture was taken right there. Well, it kind of makes sense. You're at the end of all the aqueducts and locks were one-way traffic. So you had people that were just sitting there waiting for somebody to come the other way. But then let's step over here. I'll have my excellent... Would you like me to take that down to make it easier?
No, it's fine. That's good.
Here is another picture, very famous picture. This is the little Freddie. And Mr. and Mrs. Cameron are there. Remember how I said Mom at the tiller, Mr. Cameron? And their 3 children, George, Fred, and Maddie. The little Freddie, named probably for Fred. Our archives are good, but I don't know which of the young gentlemen are Fred, but one of them on the mules. And those are clearly mules that you see there. But again, now look at the back. There's the Lackawaxen Aqueduct. Well, now I've seen 2. After I got Steve's photograph, I started going through all our photographs. I found 2 more photographs taken in this exact same spot. Well, that's got me thinking, you know, I'm pretty sure that there was an itinerant photographer, possibly, what's his name, the guy in Hawley. I know Robert Powell will remember it for me. Hensel, Ludolf Hensel. In fact, the Hensel Photography Building is still extant in Hawley today. He took a lot of stereoscopes of the D&H Canal that would crop up on online auction sites and the like. But I think that this was a regular business, and that we might still find even more photographs of boats at the outer end. But 4 makes it very probable that this wasn't happenstance or an accident, but something that must have occurred somewhere in the 1890s. Dave and I are watching from the Delaware Aqueduct. Yes, I'm going to do a Where is Our Historian there fairly soon, Mariana. Mariana and Dave. Dave Keim is our trustee in charge of he curates our wonderful lecture series and knows more about the canal. When it comes to what's on the ground in the canal, I go to Dave a lot of the time, as well as the late Dave Barber's book, but it's easier to get it from Dave than to dig through Dave's book. But it's really wonderful that people want to give us these items, and not only do they preserve the items and their stories, but we get their ancestors and the stories of their ancestors. We keep all these. We've got a 5,000 name database, and when people want to know about their relatives, sometimes we can help them out with these stories of their relatives. And this I just pulled down because we were talking about hoagies, and this is one of my favorite pictures. This is taken in the round out. There's an Ulster and Delaware rail car, kind of foreshadowing of the things to come. And there he is sitting on the mules. Sometimes they would ride on the mules. We know the story of a young lady from Dorothy Sanderson's book who learned her ABCs on muleback as she worked as a mule driver for her family's boat. It was a real family affair in that latter period, as I say, the post-Civil War period. This reminds me of the wonderful story that made the New York Times about Solomon the Mule. And they said Solomon, like so many mules, was pretty ornery, pretty mean to adults, but really good with children. So the mule drivers never had a problem with him. And he was named Solomon because, as the story goes, he tripped somehow on somebody's tow rope, and got pulled into the canal. He somehow got caught on that canal rope. And after that, he would never step over a rope. He learned, and so they thought he was that wise man Solomon. And now, just recently, while doing my Where is Our Historian pieces, and when we talk about the Roebling Aqueduct here in High Falls, I discovered a snubbing post. Snubbing posts are these stones made of Binneywater sandstone that they tied up the boats. You couldn't use an anchor. You might poke holes in the lining that kept the canal watertight in some places. But I've recently found snubbing posts that are on the outside side of the towing path, which is to say the rope would have to cross the path. And there's one by Robinson's Bridge here in High Falls, and there's also one by the Roebling Aqueduct. My surmise, this is speculation, but my surmise is that they deliberately did that because that would keep the mules, like Solomon, from going any further. It would keep the order of the boats correct. There can't be any other reason why they would have put those stones. Those stones are 1,500 pounds or more. They put them where they wanted them. It's not like they moved around. I see them sink over the years, but they don't move unless somebody moves them. I think we put that back there. And now let's take us over to the Telegraph for what should be the final thing I'll talk about today, or things I should say. Here we've got a telegraph desk. So the Telegraph, Samuel Morse, an artist and an inventor, although I think he invented some memory serves, some war kind of things too. But of course he's well known for inventing the telegraph. And recently, John Merrill was getting ready to get rid of his seasonal home here. Hey John, are you reconsidering that now? He's a New York City guy. And he donated what he said was D&H Railroad stuff. I had a tour group here, some people I was touring, a new trustee and her husband. So I didn't look at them that closely. I'm thinking, oh, railroad stuff, nice, but I'm more excited by the canal stuff. But the D&H indeed became a railroad. I didn't get to open up until later, but when I did, I was delighted to notice that this was in fact from the canal era. And if you look very carefully, how do I know that? Because it says right there, D&H C Company. In the railroad era, that final C for canal is missing. It would just be D&H. They become the D&H Railroad. So now I know that this was used in one of the telegraph offices along the run of the canal, one of which is extant here in High Falls. We're trying to get possession of it because we'd like to save it. It's starting to fall apart, and we'd love to tell its story. The D&H embraced the telegraph. By 1844, the very first telegraph line is run between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. By 1849, I know from letters in Russell Farnham Lord's correspondence journal that they were using it regularly because he would say, please respond by telegraph. Another way of saying, I need to know quickly. But here's another thing that I thought was just fascinating. If we were wondering the era, the bottom of this piece has got the date, 1887. These pieces all came together. I'll have to correspond with John a little more to figure out where he got them. And what we're going to have to do when things get to whatever normal is going to be, we've got a lot of pieces and stuff. They're in a box in the other room. I'm going to go to the Morris estate. Locust Grove over in Poughkeepsie celebrates the story. It's Samuel Morris's home. And they ought to be able to tell me a lot more about what we've got. And I plan a field trip. Maybe we'll even video a little of it, to see if we can't put together the rest of these pieces and learn more of their story. This desk here is in our permanent collection, and this desk belonged to George C. Cowton, who was the telegraph operator employed by the D&H Canal until 1885, so a little earlier than the marks on this. And this particular desk was in that telegraph office. We'd love to get that building, we'd love to restore it, and put these things back in there for you good people to come, and for you to see and celebrate this history. The D&H company were always on the lookout for new technologies. They constantly were embracing new technologies, figuring out ways to make money, and it expanded in so many different ways. It's a complex story to tell, but for me it's a delight because I can tell you this story 10 different ways, easy. It's sort of, and that's good for us too, because I have no fears of running out of content for these Sunday afternoons for Where is Our Historian? And then the third leg of that, if you would like our YouTube channel, please subscribe. The third leg of that is a tour of this museum that I'm doing in little sections to tell the story of the D&H Canal as this museum tells it, because this will be gone in 2 years. It's also been very helpful because I start to see where, oh, you know, we could use a little more about constructing the canal. And indeed, Paul, I know we've already doing a better job than what we've done here. We want to take this really wonderful canal and make it better, Canal Museum, and make it better. The canal, unfortunately, is what it is. So I think, let me show you two more things, a little foreshadowing. So these were shout out to my friend Grace Moon, to Steve DeGroot. I'd love to meet you sometime, Steve, if you're ever on the East Coast. And to John Merrill for thinking of us and donating these wonderful items. But then I go to auctions and I find things for us. And next week, I'll start showing you a bunch of that kind of stuff. But a little foreshadowing, here's a wonderful image that I bought. This is, if those of you who know Eddyville, this is lock number 1. And the brick building is now the Anchorage Restaurant. Used to be a mule barn because this was the point on the D&H Canal where the mules no longer pulled. They had to stop there and steamboats would pull, up to a dozen boats from there to Island Dock. Maybe not even a mile, I'm going to say, down. But this is a new picture, new to me, and one that unfortunately I have no more story about because I bought it on an online auction. But I'm constantly looking for this material. This one actually looks like it was taken from the air. We don't have a date, but it's still at a point. Now that lock actually had more of its wood well into the 20th century. I think there's still a piece or two left. The ravages of time, we lose more pieces of them. But I think I'm going to close today. I felt like I was running a little long, huh, folks? So I figured, I'm going to see if I can do a half hour or maybe a little more. I lose track of time once I get going. I can't help myself. But here's a wonderful item. This is a story. We're very fortunate here because we've got great images. We've got some nice stuff. We've got the historic remains. But then when it starts coming to other objects, there aren't that many. Our exhibits designers have loved that. They said, you're one of the few museums that didn't have that object that has to be there. But I've got one I discovered recently that will show you, not next week. That one will be when I do my segment on maps. That'll be 2 weeks from today. I'll talk about maps. But this particular device is a wooden box. As a woodworker and a furniture historian, I can tell you the nails tell me it was made after the Civil War. Wire nails, not just square. They were hand cut in the 18th century, machine cut in the 19th century. The Civil War, they figure out the technology to make wire nails. Cheaper, can make more nails. This is completely constructed of wood nailed together. No fancy joinery here, folks. There's numbers on it. The painting, if you look very carefully, I'm going to put it back up here. It's going to make it easier for my excellent camera person to show it to you. It's got a little slot for things going west. Okay, going back to Homesdale. Here's a repair slot. I'm going to guess this is company business. This is stuff that had to make it east. That would be the rondout. And there's the mail. This came from a family in Virginia. This was from an online auction. The family collected railroad stuff, so we do not know anything further about this. But I think the object tells a lot of its story. It was clearly at one of the offices or one of the locks along the route of the canal. I'm going to have to think it was in the middle of the canal since there's spots for east and west. And it was a spot for the mail because you had boats going through. It was a transportation network. And so why wouldn't we send that mail along? I really like these episodes in the future, folks. If you've got questions, I know I've gotten some questions from some of you. I will get to them. I know, all right, Steve DeGroot, I'll throw you one, Steve. The early boats were 75 foot long, 9 foot wide, needed about 4 foot of water, so the canal was 4 foot deep, and that would be 4 foot of water when they had 30 tons of coal. In the 1840s, the canal company started making the canal deeper. Starting in 1843, they make it a foot deeper. That's easy to do, right? You can just add some material on one side or the other, or both where you had to, and you can put more water in it. After that first foot, they're so successful, they go again. They start doing what they call hipping the boats. They put sides on the sides of the boats. They eventually get to where they can carry about 80 tons of coal. But then for the final enlargement of 1850, they redo everything. The new boats are 91 foot long, 14.5 foot wide, and eventually carry 130 tons of coal. They need 6 foot of water to take that kind of weight. So those are the boat dimensions. As per your request, Steve, please feel free to email questions to info@canalmuseum.org or historian@canalmuseum.org. Or if you can weigh in with me live every Sunday at 2, I'll try and answer your questions as they come. But I think this is a good point to stop. Join me next week when we'll look at some more wonderful acquisitions here at the D&H Canal Museum in High Falls, New York. Thank you.